Craig Melvin has learned that the hardest part of journalism rarely happens on camera because the real weight of national tragedy settles in the quiet moments afterward, when the studio lights dim, the teleprompter goes dark, and the faces of strangers he has just spoken about linger in his mind long after the broadcast ends. And over the years, he has come to understand that viewers in their 60s recognize this silence instinctively, having carried their own unspoken griefs through wars, assassinations, natural disasters, and the slow erosion of certainties they once believed would last forever. Craig does not speak often about how these stories follow him home, but Lindsay Carniak sees it in the way he grows quieter after covering a mass tragedy, and how he pauses before answering simple questions, as though part of him is still standing with the families whose lives were shattered earlier that day. And she knows from her own years in journalism that this is not weakness, but a form of respect, an acknowledgement that some events cannot be neatly packaged and left behind at the studio door. Together, they have built a rhythm that allows space for this unseen processing, understanding that for people who have lived long enough to know loss intimately, the idea of moving on too quickly feels dishonest, even cruel. And Craig often thinks about how his audience, many of whom remember exactly where they were when history cracked open, do not need dramatics to feel the gravity of the moment, because they already carry their own memories like well-worn photographs tucked away in drawers. He remembers covering tragedies early in his career with a sense of urgency that bordered on emotional armor, believing professionalism meant distance, but age and experience have taught him that true strength lies in bearing witness without surrendering compassion. A lesson reinforced each night when Lindsay gently reminds him that it's okay to sit with what he's seen, rather than trying to outrun it. Off-screen, Craig processes national grief the same way many of his viewers do, by returning to routine, by holding on to small rituals that create stability when the world feels unmoored, by understanding that grief does not always announce itself loudly, but often shows up as fatigue, silence, or a deeper-than-usual sigh at the end of the day. For those in their 60s who have learned that life's most defining moments are rarely the loudest, this quiet endurance feels familiar, and Craig is keenly aware that when he appears calm on air, it is not because the tragedy has not touched him, but because he has learned to carry it carefully, knowing that panic offers no comfort and spectacle does not honor the lives lost. Lindsay often says that the greatest challenge in journalism is learning how to stay human without becoming overwhelmed, and Craig sees this balance mirrored in the lives of the people who watch him each morning, individuals who have survived personal losses while still showing up for work, family, and community, because responsibility does not pause for grief. He thinks about them when he chooses his words, conscious that many are watching not for information alone, but for reassurance that it is possible to remain steady without becoming numb, to feel deeply without falling apart. As the years pass, Craig finds himself less interested in being first and more committed to being thoughtful, understanding that the older audience he serves values meaning over immediacy, reflection over reaction, and he recognizes that their trust has been earned through decades of consistency rather than moments of viral intensity. In the quiet hours after especially difficult stories, Craig and Lindsay talk about the emotional residue journalism leaves behind, about how repeated exposure to tragedy can subtly reshape one's view of the world, and they remind each other that resilience is not the absence of sorrow, but the decision to keep believing in decency despite everything they have seen. This belief shapes how Craig returns to the anchor desk day after day, carrying with him not just the facts of the story, but the awareness that each tragedy lands differently for every viewer, especially those who have already buried friends, parents, or partners, and who understand that grief does not fade on a schedule. For them, Craig's quiet presence is not a performance, but a form of solidarity, a signal that someone understands the weight they are carrying, even if it goes unspoken. He knows that when the camera pulls back and the segment ends, the real work begins, not just for him, but for the nation watching. Work that involves processing, remembering, and continuing to live with dignity. In this way, Craig has come to see journalism not merely as a profession, but as a shared act of endurance, one that honors the silent strength of those who watch from their living rooms, bearing witness alongside him, and finding in that shared silence a subtle but enduring sense of connection that says some burdens are lighter simply because we do not carry them alone.